Let's have a look at the spreadsheet for a single person, a one-person budget. So this might be like the kind of budget you would experience soon after or immediately after you graduate from college. Let's assume you're going to have an average starting salary of about $50,000 per year, which is more or less the average across the U.S. And it depends, of course, on your major and so on, which we've already learned about in the previous chapters. You can set these two numbers right in through here to whatever's appropriate for your age and the year that you are in there. Now, the spreadsheet automatically calculates your taxes. You can go down here to this tab named Tables from 2024, and this is the familiar tax tables from Chapter 4. And it automatically enters into here your taxes and then calculates your effective tax rate. You probably won't have to adjust anything in this table unless perhaps you're living in a state that has no income tax or perhaps a city that has no income tax, and you can adjust those like we learned about in Chapter 4. Going back to the budget now, we look at the next set of costs. In other words, we're looking at our incomes and they're going to subtract off all these costs of life to see how much is left over. Well, a major cost of life, of course, is rent. $1,000 a month per rent is your share of a two-bedroom apartment that you are sharing with another person who is also paying their $1,000. So it's a $2,000 a month apartment, two-bedroom place. And this is kind of a typical rent you might experience in the Midwest. Clearly, the coastal areas will have higher rents and you'll need a higher salary in order to accommodate that. I talk about that in the book. Now let's look at these next set of costs that go on in our life. These bills, these are our utility bills. Here are your loans, student loans, car loan, and over here is spending cash. This red triangle says go have a look at table 6.1. So down here, click on tab name table 6.1 and you'll see these different categories. Let's start with utilities. Now, utilities, these are things you pretty much have to have and have to pay for as opposed to spending cash, which I'll talk about in a moment. You're probably going to have an electric bill, gas bill, and so on down through here. Groceries, $200 a month. Can you actually live on a grocery bill of $200 a month? That's a good question. Your auto insurance may be around 1800 per year, and so that's $150 per month. You may want to check into that and then adjust this parameter. In other words, there's probably not a lot you can adjust in this set of categories, this utility bill. But if we go over here to spending cash, this is probably things that you can adjust. For example, you may not have a pet, in which case you can delete $100 per month in this budgeting. Perhaps you and your friends decide, no, you're not going to show up every time with a bottle of wine. That's what I mean by gifts for friends. You show up to their house, to their apartment, and you show up with a bottle of wine. That's 25 bucks. You do that a couple times a month, and all of a sudden you've spent $50 on your friends. Maybe you decide together, no, we're not going to do that. And that's okay. That's up to you. But you can figure out how to adjust these parameters to suit your needs. I mean, seriously, does anybody go to the movies anymore? So you can adjust those. Now down here are the loans, and the formulas in here automatically calculate your loan payment. And in this case, we're looking at the loan amount, not the loan plus the down payment, just simply straightforward loan amount. So here would be a $40,000 student loan, and those typically do not have a down payment. But here was a $20,000 loan on a car. The car may have cost, say, $30,000, and you put $10,000 down and took out a $20,000 loan. You will need to adjust these interest rates and the amount of time to pay back the loan to suit your particular case. And here you see I just made a couple of suggestions for starting numbers to put in there. And then what the spreadsheet does is it automatically takes this monthly payment and adds it with this monthly payment to come up with that number right there. And clearly what you saw with all these others, the summation is put together for you. And these three numbers are then carried over to the budgeting table, and you can see them in through here. Now we can add up all of those, subtract them off from the salary, and begin to see what's left over for investing. But there's one more thing we want to do here, and this is really an important thing. What we want to do is figure out how much money you can actually put into your company 401k. And we talked about that in the other chapters. And here what I'm saying is your company will put in, let's say, 2% of your salary. 2% of $50,000 in that very first year is $1,000 that your company is putting into your 401k. It's free money they are giving to you, provided you also invest in the 401k. And here I'm suggesting maybe you'll invest $2,000 into your 401k. That $2,000 does come out of your salary. So a total of $3,000 is going into your tax deferred investing account. We're going to subtract all this, and we're going to then come up with actually a negative $193. This negative is kind of in the noise, and we see that we have close to 3,000, not quite. It's subtract the 193 for investing in the first year. Each one of these categories here, they're growing by 2%. That's inflation. Over here, this 5% is growing by an investment rate. I've talked about how when we talk about shorter time periods of investments, we should keep this number fairly small. And in here, we're looking only at 7, 8, 10 years. Let's keep this number small to be conservative. This number, this growth rate here is the growth in your salary, and 3.5% growth in your salary is actually, I think, a reasonable assessment. We expect to see quite a ramping up in your salary during, let's say, your first 20 years of working. This percentage right here increments the tax rate, and you can read about that in the spreadsheet. 1.25 is about right to increment that tax rate. So we add this all up, and our goal is to get here by the time you're 30 years old. Our goal is to get to $50,000 invested. In Chapter 13, I talk about how that $50,000 invested in a tax-deferred account, so you're not paying any taxes on it, in the past, investing that $50,000 in an S&P 500 mutual fund that you reinvest your dividends, that would grow to $2 million, give or take $500,000 over a 35-year time frame. So by the time you're 30, get $50,000 invested. Then by the time you're 65, you might have $2 million invested in your tax-deferred accounts. So our goal in this is to get to $50,000 by the time you're 30. And of course, you can adjust your goals however suits your particular needs. That's our setup. Now let's adjust one parameter at a time to see its impact on our budgeting. For example, maybe you decide, no, I am not going to do the company match. I am not going to have a 401k. For whatever reason you decide that. All I'm going to do is change this to 0. I want you to see just how much money you are giving away. Remember, 401k monies from your company are free money. They don't cost you anything. The $2,000 does cost you. That comes out of your salary. But this 2% number, that comes from the company. So I'm going to 0 it. Watch how this number down here changes. That's $11,000. You just gave up $11,000 by simply saying, no, I don't want the 401k. All you have to do is say, yes, I would like to have that, and you'll have an extra $10,000 thanks to your company. So that's really impactful. Let's now have a look at some other costs of life. For example, we can go over here to the tab named Table 6.1. Maybe you don't have a pet. Let's just change one parameter and say you don't have a pet. So we'll change that to 0. We'll go back to the budget, and we see, wow, the pet cost us about $12,000. It's wonderful to have a pet, absolutely, but recognize there are serious costs involved in caring for your pet. Not only the food that you're feeding them, but those vet bills do add up. Let's continue with a little more assessment. We're just looking at small things and seeing how they add up. Let's go back to the table and have a look. Let's say that you and your friends decide, no, we're not going to show up with a bottle of wine each time we get together. And so you're going to 0 out the gifts for friends. And let's say that clothing, you're not going to spend $50 a month on clothing. You're going to be quite content to go to a thrift store. I have. It's great. I love to go thrifting. It's a lot of fun. And you're not going to spend $50 a month. Let's say you're going to spend far less. Let's say only $10 a month. And let's say that you're not even going to go to the movies. So we're going to just 0 a few categories like that and see what we actually save in our budgeting. Wow. We just created $25,000 by doing that. Remember before when we were spending those things, we had $51,000 for our investment, and now we've got $76,000. Small things do add up, and it's important to pay attention to those, particularly early in your investing life. These numbers that we have left over are very small. They're not $20,000, they're $2,000, $3,000, and therefore I really want you to protect them. Be careful with them. Don't go investing these into your friend of a friend's idea about Bitcoin or some other speculative type of opportunity. Speculating money means you might make a lot, but you could lose all of it. It wouldn't surprise me at all if somebody who started speculating has nothing here at the end of 30, at the age of 30. It's far better to take your time and to actually invest the way I talk about in the other chapters. Have a look at another one. Maybe your parents are just really super generous and kind, and they said, you know what, we'll cover your auto insurance and we will cover your cell phone bill. So all I've done is just zeroed those two categories, and I've also reset all of these back to our beginning. Let's see with those simple change, your parents taking care of your cell phone bill and taking care of your auto insurance. Let's see how much that saved you. Wow, we went from $51,000 invested to $87,000. So that's about a $35,000 improvement. You can really be grateful to your parents for helping you out in that case. Now let's look at one more important topic, which is what are the real costs of loans? And loans are incredibly expensive. And if you graduate from college with no loans, be very, very grateful. Let's have a look at the real costs of loans. Now I'm going to do is just collect these 8 years of loan payments. And we see we're here at the age of 30. There's 8 years of loan payments. You look down here and we're looking at about $68,000 that have been those loan payments. Now, when we take this now and go over to table 6.1, all I'm going to do is zero out the loans so that you can see how much do those loans cost you. So I'm just going to go here and say, no, you don't have a student loan. And instead, you also now have a no car loan. Maybe somebody gave you a nice car that you can now just drive around. It's a safe car with airbags and good brakes and so on. So you got a no student loans and a safe car. How much money are we talking about now? Oh my. We went from 51,000 to $133,000. There's one more thing we can do to show you just how expensive these loans are. Now I'm going to go up here because we have a lot extra money left over that we can invest. I'm going to change this to 11,500 to invest all that. And the more you invest in your tax deferred account means the more tax savings you have. So this is the advantage here of tax savings working to your favor, and now you have 151,000. That those loans were not the $40,000 loan and the $20,000 loan costing around what was that $68,000 that we had listed down here before. It was $100,000 it was costing us. We went from 51,000 to $151,000. Loans are incredibly expensive, and I hope like crazy you can avoid them if you can, but that's okay if you do have them. Just try to pay them off. Okay, so I hope this budgeting exercise is useful for you.